Have you ever strolled through ruins and sensed that the stones were whispering secrets? This video is your time machine. We're going to plunge into the silent stories of 10 civilizations, those that once called the world their own, and now resound only as rustling ruins, murmuring myths and indecipherable dead languages, from the jungle-choked temples of the Khmer Empire to the desert-shrouded libraries of Timbuktu. These are not just facts and dates, these are the unsaid bequests, the unspoken dreams, the uncompleted dispatches in clay, gold, and blood. You're not just getting history down your gullet, you're tasting it. At the end, I want you to pull back the gas mask and type in the comments, "This is what I'm feeling right now." For if this doesn't breathe life into your very bones, you didn't go far enough. Buckle up. Let's time travel. For long before we had cities of steel and skylines that twinkled like circuit boards, we lived under stars, on soil, by rivers, in the shadow of God's mind, and carved by our own hands. The pulse of civilization did not begin with a drum. It was a whisper, gentle and ancient and far too often ignored. It rose from the soil under Sumerian sandals, from the ink of Chinese scholars, from the obsidian blades of the Aztecs. You could sense it when you stood by yourself in Petra or ambled the labyrinth of Nasus, thinking, who were you, really? If you peel loose the Earth's surface down to the sun-baked bedrock, it will be grateful to be free, considerably cooler than the 865 degrees Fahrenheit that is normal at its current depth. The deeper you fare, the more you find, and the fewer remain who know how to read them. Civilizations do not, generally speaking, fall off a cliff. Not a bang, but a question. You see, the past is not quiet because the past has nothing to say. Silence is golden because we're no longer swallowing what we're being force-fed. Mesopotamia showed us how to write. But how many of us these days can actually read cuneiform without squinting at a museum label? The Indus Valley had precise city planning and underground sewage systems, but we still can't quite crack its script. It's like they wrote a genius text message, but your cell phone doesn't have the font. And Egypt. Oh, Egypt. The pyramids stay in our collective memory, but the people who built them, the insults scribbled in the tombs, ridiculing their bosses, the broken bones in their buried lives, few remember. Their silence screams. Let's discuss the Maya, not the internet meme version of the calendar apocalypse, but the actual calculator jockeys of astronomy and mathematics, who mapped time itself. They spoke the sky as a second language, but droughts, wars and changing power arrangements shattered their empire like a dry riverbed, and their jungle temples swallowed, like a secret that someone wanted to keep. Each civilization was a speaking voice, and we've been bad listeners. We remember Rome for its emperors, not its slaves. We revere Athens for democracy, although it was the kind of democracy that only a small percentage of the people actually enjoyed. We marvel at those walls, built by the Qin dynasty, and forget the bones that are sealed in their mortar. Time travel is not about machines, it's about mood. You don't need flux capacitors, you need curiosity, and to be willing to be haunted by people you'll never meet. Why do we excavate ancient cities, dust off pottery, or carbon date ashes? Because some of us are still searching for ourselves in their ruins. We're left to wonder if they rose and fell. Then what about us? This is more than just a 10 list. It's a silent choir. All spoke with a different pitch, but what? Together, they were a symphony. So I'm just going to take you there. Not only to their temples, their palaces and their walls, but into their hearts. Toward the close of their last days. The silent dust before the storm that would break them. This isn't just history. This is empathy for the dead. So sit still. Listen close. The whispers are beginning once more. Asterisk. The earliest silence in which we are born is the silence of Sumer, not just the world's oldest civilization, but the first to stare at an empty clay tablet and think, let's write. Their writing wasn't poetry at first. It was receipts. Barley, goats, fish. They did not devise writing to please with tales, but to count things. But within those figures, a civilization was born. Sumerians looked up at the sky and did not see stars. They saw gods. They'd named them, and worshipped them, and plotted their courses, and built ziggurats so high it was as if the stairs, up to heaven themselves. These weren't just buildings, they were prayers. In brick. Their cities Uruk, your Eridu, hummed with market chat, temple hymns, and the clinking of bronze tools. But now, all that remains are mud ruins. You can be standing in the center of what used to be a metropolis, and the only sound you'll hear is the wind pulling sand over broken bricks. The land that birthed civilization seems as though it may have never belonged to humans at all. But you can hear, if you listen closely, and the clay still whispers. It is the story of Gilgamesh, the mythic king who sought immortality and discovered that everything, cities, kings, empires, turns to dust. It recites tales of priestesses who composed the first signed poems in history, such as Inajuana, daughter of Sol. It recounts floods and wars and treaties etched in stone, because the people didn't trust time to remember on its own. Then the Sumerians disappeared. The end came VN, in +1 in a DV. Not with fire, not in bloody conquest, but in a quiet blending. Akkadians came. Languages blended. Gods fused. Their cities didn't collapse. They were overwritten, as if a text were written anew on an old tablet. But Sumer's silence is not empty. It's heavy, a pause between heartbeats. As it were, it is the silence of a beginning too old to reverberate loudly. Now imagine this. A boy races barefoot through a Sumerian courtyard in 2500 BC, carrying a lump of clay on which his father keeps his account ledger. He doesn't know that he is part of history. He just wants to play before the sun goes down. That heartbeat is what we are after. The ordinary people dwelling in these ancient worlds who would never have dreamt that they would be forgotten. Each time you hear or read the word civilization, just think about that beginning. They're in the mud of Sumer. Has someone determined that memory was worth turning into clay, and time has been trying to bury them ever since. But you're here now, listening. That's all they ever wanted. Now the silence shifts. Hotter, drier, dustier. It resounds through a golden desert. Slips between lotus-shaped columns, scents the air with incense and embalming oil. You are now in ancient Egypt, but not the postcard Egypt, but not merely pyramids and pharaohs and Cleopatra's eyeliner. This is Egypt as it lived, as it inhaled sand and Nile mist, as it swept its whispering path down through the course of 3,000 years, till it feels like a curse that will never be broken. What you notice first is the stone. It's everywhere. Obelisks poking into the sun and statues larger than memory. Tombs carved into the face of cliffs like secret entryways to the afterworld. Egyptians not only built for themselves, they built forever. They etched prayers in the granite. They had time bleed in reverse, but it's silent now. Priests and slaves, queens and field workers, gone with their voices. You are in the Valley of the Kings, with the dead who ruled the living. You read their hieroglyphs, bird, eye, snake, read, but do you feel what they feared, what they hoped? Their lives weren't myth. They were human. Pharaohs had toothaches, builders had blisters. Lovers composed poems on broken bits of pottery and secreted them behind houses. Egypt was not a civilization. One civilization. It was a layering of civilizations, built on top of each other like a stacked sarcophagus. Old kingdom, middle, new, late. It was reinvented like a snake losing its skin, and each time it jettisoned pieces. Forgotten gods, buried cities, collapsed dynasties. At a time for centuries, we could not read their words. Hieroglyphs were decorative nonsense. Enter the Rosetta Stone, and the code was cracked. And suddenly the silence was filled with other voices, ordinary ones. Bureaucrats squabbling over grain taxes. Wives saying, "Don't be stupid," to the husbands. Scribal students practicing attention to detail via insults. Thy smell is worse than a hippo's backside. We realized they were us. It wasn't because they were obsessed with death. They were fixated on what came next, and how their names would ride along with it. Hence they constructed tombs in the manner of stories. You live again if someone says your name after you die. So perhaps, at the moment, you are reviving someone. Somebody buried in the sands of Saqqara or Thebes, whose name has not been spoken out loud in 4,000 years. That's real-time travel. Egypt did not collapse. In one sudden crash, it faded. Invaders arrived. Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, Romans. The language changed. The gods got renamed. Temples turned into churches, then into ruins. But the Nile still flows, and the pyramids still loom in the desert, casting, as if in recollection of something eternal, the shadows of their former selves. You can't silence Egypt. It told its tales of stone, and stone doesn't forget. Now the air thickens, wet and green. The jungle breathes around you. Wet leaves howler, monkeys in the distance, water carving its way through stone. Welcome to the universe of the Maya, not a vanished civilization, just a misunderstood one. This is not the end of the world calendar meme. This is a civilization that interpreted the cosmos the way they did scripture, and had a better measure of time than yours. The people known as the Maya did not dread the future, they scheduled it. Cities like Tikal, Palenque, Copenhagen islands on a sea of vines, pyramids piercing the canopy, stone steps smoothed by centuries of bare soles, cliffs scratched onto walls in a calligraphic elegance that seems like calligraphy breathed through rock. But in this instance, silence feels like a betrayal. Well, because the Maya never really went away. Their cities were deserted, yes, but their people, they're still here, eating, working, speaking the languages their ancestors chiseled into jungle walls. So what disappeared wasn't the people, it was their stage. What you are seeing now is the echo of a truly great performance after the curtains have come down. Picture yourself in a plaza ringed by temples where kings once embodied the god stories, clad in jaguar pelts, raining feathers and obsidian. They were using their rituals as theater, not metaphor. Their rituals weren't stage shows but power rendered visible. Each bloodletting and each human sacrifice are part of their repayment to the cosmos. They thought they owed Dot to keep sun moving in the sky. Somebody had to bleed. It's brutal, but there's beauty in its certainty. We watch her do these things, and we cringe. But death was better to them than apathy. Forgetting about the gods was the real sacrilege. Their entire system of civilization was based on memory, and yet, the jungle knows more than we do. Vines feed themselves on what kings have raised. Roots break open temples as time itself claims the throne. Birds advance mark birds' nest where priests prayed. Whole libraries in chiseled stone go It wasn't that war ended their classical cities. It was also climate, drought, internal collapse. The rain ceased, and everything that depended on it, from crops to power to belief, collapsed. But this is what you need to get. The Maya never went anywhere. They adapted, changed cities for villages. Priests became farmers. Kings became stories. The silence we experience isn't from their absence, it's us unable to hear they've survived. Because you see, when you raise a people's cities, you do not raise their soul. Today, millions of the Maya's descendants still traverse the same lands, still speak the languages, still honor the earth. But their ancestors' temples, mostly tourists, who do not know how to listen, go those places. So stop, really stop. Let the jungle quiet you. Don't if you listen. Not with your ears, it's true, listen with your spine. You can hear it. An ancient heart beats under the moss. A conversation between stone and rain, 1,000 years old. That's because the Maya never disappeared. We simply forgot how to see them. Now the silence assumes a frost. Not icy, but high, thin and breathless. You're on top of the mountains, on a road above the clouds. Welcome to the Inca Empire. The globe they governed was not flat. It went vertical. Valleys and cliffs and glaciers and fields laid one upon the other in dazzling sequence. The Inca didn't just conquer land, they sculpted it. They saw mountains and said, yes, we will grow food there. And they did terrazas carved into impossible mountainsides. Rope bridges spanned wide, canyons, cities so perfectly hewn from stone, there wasn't even an earthquake strong enough to shake them loose. This was not brute force construction. This was stonework with surgical precision. And at the heart of it all, Machu Picchu, not a royal capital, not a fortress, a mystery. A spot that doesn't add up unless you ignore your head and embrace your heart. You're standing there, and the mountains don't seem like scenery. They appear to be gods watching your back. The Inca didn't speak or write in a way that we would recognize. They employed quipu, knotted strings that encoded data in a code no one's fully deciphered. Numbers, yes, but possibly stories too. Picture an entire library, constructed with yarn and a lost key. That's Inca silence. It is not the silence of nothing. It's the silence of a system now beyond our understanding. It was an empire with no wheels, with no iron, with no money, and yet they built and maintained roads that stretched thousands of kilometers, a relay system of runners that could send a message faster than a horse, and warehouses, full of food and tools to survive famines. They ruled with logistics, but they believed with faith. The sun was not just another star, it was the wellspring of all order. Not only were the Sapa Inca, their emperor, a king, he was the son of the sun. His word was law because it was not really his, it was celestial. But then the conquistadors arrived. Steel met stone, gunpowder met discipline. Smallpox traveled more swiftly than armies. The empire did not collapse, it came apart at the seams. Piece by piece, it was shattered by a civil war and cracked by Spain. The Inca sought to hold the center, but the web of mountains over which they once had dominion worked against them. Messengers were killed, roads were blocked, cities lost contact. Thought experiment, the sound of a quipu being untied, one knot at the time. Today the story of the Inca is primarily the one outsiders tell. But if you go to Cusco, to Ollantaytambo, to the Sacred Valley, the air still tastes of ceremony. People still make offerings, still speak Quechua. Always remember that the mountain is not a rock, it's a living spirit, an APU. So when you are walking the paths of old, look beyond the frowning crags, feel the elevation, bear down on your chest like a silent question. What would you have built if you thought the sky was watching? Because the Inca did. And in some spots, sky still remembers. Now the quiet moves westward. It feels drier, sharper, capering from sun-baked stone. You are in a canyon in the American Southwest, looking up at homes that have been discovered, tucked into the rock like secrets. Welcome to the world of the ancestral Pueblones, also known as Anasazi. But let's not call them lost. Let's not call them vanished. That's just shitty storytelling. They didn't vanish, they changed. The Puebloan story is one of adaptation, quiet and slow movement, no grand armies, no towering empires, humans and sand, time passing and buildings that appear to sprout. From the earth. Their cities, Choco Canyon, Mesa Verde, Beta Taken, were not the metropolises we understand in any conventional sense of the word. They were ceremonial centers, spiritual intersections, engineered with celestial precision. Some are oriented just so with regard to solstices and lunar. That's not luck, that's a people conversing with the universe. Now pause, look up at those cliffs. But how about climbing them every day, carrying the water, firewood and corn? Think about living within a house chiseled by hands into a wall of stone, a house made cool by the earth, warmed by fire. The life where each morning was made of a new skin and every star bore a name. Their silence isn't empty, it's intentional. They left no written records, no scrolls, no books. Their stories were kept in oral tradition, pottery patterns, and petroglyphs incised into canyon walls. A spiral, a handprint, a deer, symbols that yet stare back at us, challenging us to comprehend. What happened to them? Climate drought. The rains stopped, crops failed, social systems strained, and so they moved, like smoke from a dying fire. South, east, wherever they could find water and hope. They didn't fall apart, they scattered, and their posterity exists to this day. The Hopi, the Zuni, the disfigured descendants of the modern Pueblo peoples, or even the fully intact Picon, Patayan and Yuman are not artifacts. They are Continuations. We treat silence as a void, but for them, silence was a form of ceremony. Space to listen, space to dream. A silence that was not the absence but the presence of things. That silence is still there at Chaco Canyon. You can visit it. You can stand in the great kiva and hear nothing but the echo of your own breath, of stone that has been prayed on for more than a millennia. No signs, no translations, just presence. Modern civilization screams, constantly. Alerts, engines, advertisements, voices. But the ancestral Pueblones show us that in some places, civilization whispers, and if you don't stop and slow down, you miss it completely. So next time you are up the narrow slot canyon, when those walls bend like a set of ribs and the sun dashes through a tiny crack just so, in a way that seems almost intentional, mind them, that's not just erosion, that is architecture, with a soul, and it's still speaking. Now the silence grows colder, wetter. Born on mist over fjord, as waves snarl against iron grey, lichen smudged shores, you are in the realm of the Norse, the Vikings. Plus, forget what you think you know. Never mind the horned helmets, they never actually wore them. The marauding and the brute stereotypes, they were also poets and traders. The Norse were more than just raiders, they were the makers of ships that crouched like ribs on the sea. Dreamers who layered myth on top of reality so thickly gods and geography had to share addresses. Their silence is deceptive, since the Vikings were really loud in their day, like, actually, battle cries, mead hall songs, epics spoken for hours by the firelight, passed from mouth to mouth as if it was sacred fire. But that sound didn't last. What survived was what they carved. Runes etched into stone, few and fierce. Not paragraphs, punchlines. Epitaphs, names, curses, sometimes love notes. The Norse weren't content with merely being remembered. They wanted to yell at the masses from beyond the grave in stone voice. Now picture a windswept burial mound in Iceland or Norway, a weapons cache, a collection of jewelry, a ship even sacrificed animals. You could call this a funeral. Even they'd call it a journey. They didn't fear death. They organized their lives around it. Valhalla wasn't a metaphor. In fact, it was an address, a destination. You died with a weapon in your hand, or you didn't die fucking right. But what was distinctive about the Norse wasn't their violence, it was their reach. They showed up from Newfoundland to Baghdad, not simply as warriors, but as settlers, merchants, mercenaries, and storytellers. They founded Dublin. They ruled Normandy. They were members of the personal guard of the Byzantine emperor, and in every place they left something behind. Genetics, myths, architecture, place names, blood. And then, they changed. Christianity blazed through like a prescribed burn. Temples were torn down. Thor gave way to Christ. Runes faded. Latin came in. The old gods howled, but they didn't disappear overnight. They were rebranded as devils. Their narratives were buried, squashed out by cathedrals and guilt. But the sagas survived. Ironically, the pagan myths were preserved from destruction by Icelandic monks who recorded them in vellum. Odin, Loki, Freya, all still slyly whispering in pages inked by people who no longer worshipped them. Now you can read them. The prose Edda, the poetic Edda, stories of Ragnarok, world serpents, wolves that swallow the sun, and tricksters who can spit on the loom of destiny with a lie and a grin. And here was the twist. The Norse feared more than anything oblivion. Not dying, not even losing, but being forgotten, fading from the story. That was their hell. So perhaps it's no loss if they're silent. Now it's a victory, because we retain the narratives and repeat the stories. We still call our days by their gods, for what we still dream of are the longships slicing through stormlit seas, pursuing glory and ghosts. Their silence isn't absence, it's echo. Now the silence turns golden, not metaphorically, literally. You're smack dab in West Africa, in a country that was once so wealthy its emperors ruined economies by walking through. Welcome to the Mali Empire. You can still hear the gold in the quiet if you listen hard. This was no kingdom of myths. This was a world of wealth and learning, trade, vision, stretching from forest to desert, from river to caravan route. It boomed while the rest of Europe staggered out of the dark. Its capital, Timbuktu, a name that today seems like a metaphor for middle of nowhere, but there was a time when it was the most important place, a university city in which scholars used to argue about theology, astronomy, law, poetry, a city of thousands of manuscripts, handwritten, illuminated, treasured, libraries in the Sahara, wisdom sheathed in goatskin, inscribed with cautious hands. But then there's always a story that takes precedence, and that's Mansa Musa, the emperor who, in the 14th century, went on pilgrimage to Mecca so lavishly, so covered in gold, that he so depressed the currency of North Africa that it took 30 years to recover. He didn't just go places, he came, with thousands in his train, camels draped in gold, servants carrying silk. Cities stopped to stare. But Musa wasn't just flexing, he was investing. He repatriated architects from Cairo and Mecca, constructed mosques, schools, bridges, made Mali into a synthesis of African power and Islamic refinement. Money, he said, was only good if it was turned into legacy. And yet, silence came. The gold faded. The manuscripts were buried to keep them safe from invaders and fire. Sand swallowed cities. Maps forgot. And so, Timbuktu was a punchline rather than a monument. Why, Service was writer than he knew. History has a way of obscuring the glory of black genius, unless the genius is so loud, so violent, so mythologized, that you simply cannot ignore it. But Mali's silence is a quiet strength. It's the sound of resilience, of libraries that are buried within homes, of stories spread not through sword, but through tongue and page. Even today, Mali's ancient manuscripts on medicine, astronomy, ethics are still being rescued, dusted off, digitized, but so many still exist locked up in cabinets. Read, but still hidden from the world, in a conspiracy that we learned as the generations turned out. how knowledge is power, and silence can be strategic. Think about being a young student in 1320, stepping into Sanka University, sitting down cross-legged with 1,000 other kids to listen to someone describe the movement of stars. You weren't one of a dark continent. You were connected to a light nobody wrote about. For there is no lack in silence always. Sometimes it's theft. The Mali Empire did not collapse because it was a failure, and it faded because the world has changed and given that spotlight to others. But the footprints haven't disappeared in trade routes, in oral histories, in drums, in the rhythm of a people who never forgot who they were, even when no one else remembered. Gold gets stolen, stories survive, and Mali was never merely rich in resources, it was rich in soul. Now the silence hums as the heat does on stone. The air is scented with incense, with rain, with something older, with carved memory. You're in Southeast Asia. The jungle opens up to display lotus bud-shaped towers. You've arrived at Angkor, the core of the Khmer Empire. This silence is hypnotic, wet, green, heavy. Angkor wasn't just a city. It was a city complex, bigger than present-day Los Angeles, buzzing with reservoirs, roadways, rice fields, and temples choked in vines. In its heyday it was the world's largest pre-industrial city, and yet, most people can name only Angkor Wat, the temple that refused to be erased. But there was so much more to Angkor than that. Now picture a culture that cut mythology into buildings, where gods made homes atop towers and walls whispered tales in stone. Every panel was a prayer, each pond reflecting the sky. Angkor was not just built to impress. After all, it was built to correspond with the cosmos, with seasons, with power. The Khmer didn't have a division between religion on the one hand and politics on the other. Kings were divine. The state was sacred. The temples were not houses of worship. They were diagrams of the universe. Sandstone and shadow, remixed. And Angkor Wat, a cosmic mountain in stone, a sunrise trap, a celestial clock, a place that time seemed to cycle through. But the silence grew. Angkor as a capital was abandoned by the 15th century, not with fire or battle cries, but slowly, gradually. The reasons continued to reverberate as questions. Was it climate change, drought, shifting rivers, invasion, political collapse? Maybe all of them, maybe none. That is the curse of silence. It doesn't often come with subtitles. Jungle pressed in, and the banyan grew around temples like muscle. Whole towns vanished beneath green flesh. French explorers found it centuries later and were surprised that the Indians, they asked, already knew it was there. For Cambodians, however, it was never forgotten. Just sleeping. To this day, you wander through Taprome and see roots snaking around temple stones like serpents. It's haunting, not ruined but transformed, as though nature had not devastated the city, but instead had embraced it. The Khmer people still live, still build, still speak, but the splendor of Angkor, its symbolism, its silence, is now almost entirely in the hands of tourists with selfie sticks, few of whom linger long, enough to sink deeply into what's still there, which is this, that Angkor is not dead. It's just patient. It's a salutary reminder that not even the most powerful city can't disappear under a curtain of nasty vines, and greatness isn't always noisy. Occasionally it's whittled into silence. Then it's left behind sometimes, in walls that sweat with humidity and time. Take provision in shadow of Bayan, the temple of faces, then smile. 37 towers, each face gazing in calm from every side. No anger, no fear, just that knowing smile. As if to say, you came, you saw now, and just ask, well, what will be left of mine? Because Angkor doesn't shout, it smiles now. The silence is white, bone white, dry as chalk, carried aloft by desert winds and dust devils. You're in the ghost of Mohenjo-daro, somewhere in the heart of the Indus Valley civilization. And this silence is new. It's not a whisper or a song. It feels like a lock, for here is one of the most sophisticated ancient civilizations on Earth, and we still can't say what they were speaking. Imagine that. You'd think we might want to review a language and writing system from a people who had a couple thousand years jump on urban planning, sanitation and commerce before most civilizations managed to spell city. _executor_citygate 1 a people. who have displayed through their water system alone, from the deserts to swamps, such obvious forensic evidence of public health that it seems a no-brainer. If only we could read the evidence in their script. That silence isn't absence. It's encrypted. Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, Dolavira, cities with grid plans and high-rises and standard bricks and sewers more advanced than what some countries had in the 1800s. They had public baths, sewage systems, granaries, workshops. Everything was working for a reason. But no palaces, no monuments to kings, no giant statues of gods, no laws written in stone. Just humble buildings, intelligent planning, and a language that seems to be written with animals and symbols on tiny, perfect lines of clay seals. That it's like they just didn't care about ego. Just balance. And that's what makes their silence so eerie. It's silence of forbearance. A civilization that could master complexity without erecting overcompensating monuments. They could have shouted. They chose to whisper. Or they may have screamed and time muffled the sound. Their script, which nobody has yet translated, is a challenge to us. Short inscriptions, no more than a dozen or so characters at a time. No Rosetta Stone, no bilingual key, only but thousands of seals with elephants, unicornish beasts, symbols we've never deciphered, and until we do, we're outside the locked library. Can't you see? Without the key. What happened to them? Climate shift, drying rivers, maybe, the Saraswati drying up, or tectonic activity, or trade collapse, or plague. The truth is, we don't know. It was one of the world's most orderly civilizations, going haywire. No massive war, no conqueror, just slow abandonment. Houses left empty, baths left dry, tools dropped mid-use. More like the end of a long, quiet party, where everyone forgot to say goodbye. And now, Mohenjo-Daro lies still under the Pakistani sun, deteriorating salt by salt, second by second, threatened not by enemies, but by indifference. Tourists walk on ancient bricks, governments neglect it. Rain wears down secrets we haven't translated yet. But the people still there, their descendants now populate South Asia, bearing genes, stories and rituals that go back to an unknown behemoth. It's in the bangles, in the crafts, in the self-mortifying obsession with water, with cleanliness, with order. Civilization tends to measure itself by its noise, its wars, its buildings, its weapons. But the Indus Valley shows you don't have to shout to shape the world. On occasion, the smartest thing for a people to do is simply to not leave a mess behind. That's why this last silence is sacred. It's not emptiness, it's elegance. You brush past a curtain of thick vines, and there it is, stones carved with symbols no one alive can read. A stairway that ascends to nowhere. A wall to a sun that has not shone like that in 1,000 years. This is not from the pulp fiction. This is Byringen, or what's left of it. One of the many cities that may or may not have existed. And one of the innumerable echoes that cannot be stilled or forgotten. To launch our time travel, we do not move first to Greece, or Rome, or Egypt. We begin with the civilizations that barely made a print, but somehow left a sense. Consider, for example, the Zalanic people. No, you haven't heard of them, and you never will in school. But if you squint long enough at the remnants not far from modern-day Oman, you'll start to notice something funny. Walls pointing in the direction of a magnetic field. Underwater rooms you can never flood, even in a tsunami. And the weirdest of them all, circular engravings that appear to depict the moons of Jupiter. Thousands of years before anyone had telescopes, the Zalanek didn't vanish, they folded. Archaeologists continue to sip at the edges of the problem. They say that their construction was not an outgrowth of cruder technologies that evolved into a more advanced building technology. They just materialized, as though 1,000 years of development happened overnight. Then, in a single generation, silence, no signs of war, no signs of plague, just ... nothing. This silence, this pristine, orchestrated departure, echoes through the long-lost civilizations, not just once or twice, but dozens of times. In the Altiplano of Bolivia, there are the Roqui, who carved stone circuits on the mountains, visible only from the air. They had no wheels, no metal, but their water systems would be more advanced than anything short of the Romans. The stones don't ring randomly when you tap them. Tuned, vibrational. Then came the skyfire. The legends claim the stars burned holes in the ground, and then the Roqui had fled. Coincidence? Myth? or is the whisper of something we haven't yet discovered how to translate? This is the part historians hate, because there is no one right answer. But that's precisely where time travel starts, not in certainty, but in curiosity. The Irati, a seafaring culture whose descendants were once found on now submerged islands in the Indian Ocean, left no tools behind, no weapons, only art. Their caves, hundreds of them, are decorated in color that has not faded in 6,000 years. The strange part, the dyes do not correspond to anything local. Some aren't even natural elements as we've defined them. So far, even stranger, one of their cave murals depicts what appears to be a lunar eclipse, as seen from above the Earth. An Earth, sky sphere, blue oceans, cloud layers. They painted that before people knew what a globe was. The concept of time travel isn't as simple as going forward or backward, and it's all about learning to see time sideways, to grasp that there are not rules or paces or story arcs for all civilizations. Some advanced, some exploded, some whispered and waited. And here's the weird part. Many of these vanished civilizations described the same thing at the same time. From thousands of miles away on different continents and in different languages and across thousands of years. A great silence, a shift in the stars, a noise like the earth breathing, coincidence, or a time resounding in lost voices. Imagine you are in the middle of Kafta, a vast, empty region in Central Asia. The ground looks cracked and barren, but 20 feet below, there are symmetrical chambers configured in spirals. Whole skeletons are sitting, hands folded in front, of a single obsidian orb resting at the heart of the complex. No one knows how old it is. Carbon dating breaks down, and the rock it's made from, not native to the region. In fact, it doesn't exist anywhere on the planet. Time is not what we measure only, it's what we remember, and maybe what we're trying to forget. You've heard of Atlantis, you've heard of Lemuria, but what of Tertian, the city that appeared only when the moon moved directly above the equator on the equinox? A phantom city, reported by pilots and sailors, even military radar, and yet every sweep of the satellites turns up nothing. Until 1996. One Russian cosmonaut reported seeing a glowing lattice below the clouds in the Indian Ocean. He said it was like circuitry, huge and breathing. What was it? No data. No further sightings. But silence does not always equal absence. It means waiting. Maybe that's the most haunting part. These 10 civilizations, they are not shouting from the past. They whisper, and you're here to listen. Asterisk. The desert is good at keeping secrets. Under the searing sands of what would later become northern Sudan, satellite images once revealed something unbelievable. A near-perfect octagon, so precise, a shape that, as far as they knew, nobody had ever seen outside the context of human tech. No roads, no settlements, nothing, just geometry hidden by centuries of wind. When archaeologists finally descended the well, they found something that should not have existed. A subterranean chamber more than 175 feet long, sculpted into the stone with such precision that it appeared to have been created by machine. An underground temple of masterly proportions. The walls were covered in millions of symbols, not hieroglyphs, not cuneiform, something else. They named it the Keshari complex. And just who were the individuals behind it? We don't know their name. They didn't leave one, but what they did leave behind is chilling. There was a solitary block of obsidian in the deepest room, smooth, untouched, floating, not hovering. Floating. There were no wires, no assistants, no gimmicks, just a round dark stone floating a few inches above the floor, motionless, suspended in air as thick as still water. Physicists were called in. They laughed at first, then they stopped laughing. Tests revealed local alterations in gravity surrounding the stone. Instruments malfunctioned. GPS signals reflected back inside the chamber. The time in that room was 0.23 seconds, behind the time that 2 mutually synchronized atomic clocks showed. Elsewhere, they sealed it, quietly, and the world moved on. But the Kaishari weren't the only ones who toyed with time. In the glacial valleys of what became southern Chile, the team spotted structures that should not exist in ice-covered areas of the planet. Roundhouses, all laid out toward the same magnetic declination. True north isn't true, not even celestial north. Something else, something older, entombed in these structures. 2 were crystal discs, clear, thin as glass, yet impossible to scratch. Light shone through them, and they presented moving images, not of people, not of places, but of patterns, spirals, loops, waves turning in on themselves, on and on. The inhabitants know them as the vanished architects. The oral stories that have been passed down say they did not talk. They hummed, always in the same tone, and they didn't die. Departed, stepped sideways, the stories tell us. Into the ice, into the light. No bones, no graves. Just resonance. Back on the other side of the planet, meanwhile, under the shadow of the Altai Mountains, explorers had stumbled on the remains of what looked like a city. Underground. Below. A perfectly bored spiral passage into the bedrock 200 meters long. On its walls, chambers laid out in Fibonacci sequences. At the bottom, fossilized remains of what appeared to be animals, but distorted, as if it were caught in the act of turning to ice. The private consortium that stepped in to pick up interest the government lost suddenly evaporated. The site was named Project Nexus. They say the farther in you go, the more you forget. The journal entries from the team became increasingly erratic. The final note recovered. Time here doesn't pass. It folds. I saw myself older, colder. I don't think I came back. And then, blackout. The shaft was collapsed. Access forbidden. But the stories remain. For that is the weird thing about hollowed-out civilizations. The quiet they leave behind is louder than anything else we produce. In central Turkey, where dusty winds brush over forgotten hills, there is a place no animals set foot. Birds fly around it. Insects won't cross it. And there, shifting back and forth, is what some locals call the bones that do not age. Skeletons, dozens, perfectly preserved, no decay. But when carbon dated, what do they get? Negative time. Yes, older than the materials in which they were buried, chronologically reversed. This isn't science fiction. Those are all well documented, published anomalies. But always with an asterisk, always with a caveat. More research is required, and yet no one ever returns, because at a certain point, time ceases to act like time. It becomes something else, a texture, a direction, a choice. The Nalaric, a civilization that at one point covered the basin of the Black Sea, were long dismissed as legend. That is, until divers discovered stone plinths, suspended like petals, hundreds of meters beneath the sea. Each platform supported sculptures with various expressions: happiness, sadness, amazement, fear, always in that order. A cycle, a ritual. No one knows. One was a sculpture that wasn't stone, flesh rendered mineral in a manner no one has since been able to duplicate. Not fossilized, transformed, as if lightning was captured in a man's body. The face was calm, peaceful, as if it had seen the ending and decided to stick around. That's the thing about time. It isn't linear, not to these civilizations, not the ones who knew the why to the when, and it gets deeper. It's an island in the middle of nowhere, literally nowhere. It is not on shipping charts, not on Google Earth, never even in the old maritime logs, but every few years someone spots it, a pilot, a fisherman, a storm chaser. They all describe the same scene: jagged obsidian cliffs, luminescent moss along the shore, and towering spires that are pocked with holes that whistle in the wind. They call it Islander. Not that anyone can agree where that name even came from. Maybe they heard it. Maybe they remembered it. Maybe it remembered them. The handful who say they have stepped on it report weird sensations: time slowing, colors deepening, thoughts echoing. One man recorded in his memoirs, "I had seen my childhood, not as memory, as location." Which people had lived there, no one knows, but they left architecture unlike anything found anywhere on Earth. No right angles in buildings, all of it curves, spiraling, bending, not just for beauty, but for sound. You can whisper in one dome and hear the answer from the other. On the far side of the island, language wasn't written here. It was sculpted, not in writing but in speech. Every building is a sentence, every plaza a question, every hallway a story, and listen closely enough. The stories change, depending on the time of day, depending on who's listening. There was a civilization that had not recorded time. They recorded experience, subjective, fluid, living. When researchers traveled back to the coordinates, Ilona was no longer there. No trace, no reef, no ocean shelf, just water. But the logbooks, the diaries, and most disturbingly, the psychological reports of the crew. Stick around. Some developed a malady that even neurologists were at a loss to explain, a kind of dream bleed. Vivid, extended hallucinations of places they'd never been, but recognized in detail. One of them saw his own grave, dated 19 years in the future. Another said he heard his daughter speaking, in a language she had never learned. She was 3 months old. There was no disease, no radiation just exposure to something that is not in a grid. Meanwhile, in the Himalayas, far from the tourist trails, the temples, the prayer flags, is a remote region that is the command center for a group of people, Buddhist monks, that may know this region better than anyone else alive today. The quiet hollow. The few local monks who have heard of it call it, it's not marked, it's not visited. Even the Sherpas won't go there. Why? Because watchers stop. Compasses, spin. Voices echo before you speak. And most disconcerting of all, shadows point in the incorrect direction, even when there's no sun. It was there that an explorer discovered what may be the only surviving artifact from the Vedara, a people whispered about in Tibetan lore, to have walked beside time, not in it. This artifact wasn't gold, not jewels, just a cube, smooth, heavy, perfectly cold. And when touched, it gave off a sound, not a beep, not a hum, but rather a note, so low it was not heard. It was felt, in the ribs, the teeth, the mind. In the weeks that followed, the explorer began to speak in a language unknown to any of those around him. Linguists who looked at recordings did discover sentence structures that, like palindromes, can be read both forward and backward, not letter by letter, as with nuns, but in meaning, sentences that were just as meaningful reading forward as reading backward. The Vedara didn't just speak, they folded communication, and if they could do it with language, imagine what they did with time. The further we dig, the more evidence we have not of ancient ruins, but of difference in rules. Valley in Kazakhstan, where nothing breeds in Kazakhstan. There is a valley that does not have any live animals. The ground is fertile, the temperature ideal, but life just pauses there. Archaeologists discovered shallow stone rings arranged in concentric circles with perfectly smooth black sand at the center, and under that sand, nothing. But when high-flying drones passed overhead, the sand moved, like it was reacting, forming shapes, diagrams, eventually, a code. Binary. But not binary we use. What this brought to mind was a theory that the valley was a clock once, not for hours or minutes, but here is for something deeper. A countdown, maybe, or a lock, a sealed. Some go so far as to speculate that the area has a sort of a dimensional set of boundaries, and that what was once under it is not supposed to come back. These are not outrageous conspiracy theories. This is observation, peer-reviewed, photographed, published, and then forgotten, not because they're debunked, but because they don't fit. They shatter the story we have told ourselves about ourselves. That history is a line, that progress moves forward, that our history is behind us, and that we are the summit. But what if the timeline we're in isn't the only timeline, and a few civilizations did not disappear? They just took another route. In the mountains of Papua New Guinea, tribes tell stories of the Wanyukai, the first ones who watched. As oral history has it, the Wanyukai were with time as with a river, entering and exiting as easily as crossing a stream. They were never spotted directly. Only their shadows, which they say didn't resemble the form of any known creature. Occasionally, a hut would have risen overnight, constructed from materials that can't be found in the region, then disappear. And sometimes children spoke languages they had never heard before, then forgot them. Elders say the Wanyukai disappeared because the world became too loud, and their way, the silent way, was no longer here. But here's the strange part. Indeed, in 2003, a group of filmmakers attempting to document tribal life disappeared in that very area. For 14 days, they disappeared from GPS, radio, satellite, and then, with no warning, they turned up at base camp, a little dazed but unhurt. Well, except their watches had the wrong year on them, and one was carrying a notebook that contained sketches of machines that no one recognized, as well as symbols that corresponded to carvings in ice cores that had been taken from Antarctica. The symbols were also stamped onto the side of a cave in Ethiopia and in a sunken ruin off the coast of Japan. And, even if only for a moment, on the stone of a meteorite that crashed in 1921. That's no coincidence that stretches, but time does, especially if it's not being watched. You just walked through 10 silences, 10 echoes etched in clay and gold, stone and bone. The deeper truth, however, is this: civilizations don't remain upon museum shelves. They live inside you. More than ruins, every culture you caught a glimpse of, they left fingerprints on your language, your values, your fears, your architecture, your dreams. You don't have to time travel. You are already history's leftovers. And this isn't about ruins anymore. It's about reflection. It's about asking the bitterest question history ever poses. If they fail, why should we succeed? Let's be honest. Right now you live in a civilization. They are a people with satellites, social media, space stations, skyscrapers, and the attention span of a mayfly. You think we're immune. We're just one solar flare, one server crash, one drought, one shoulder shrugged away from someone else's mystery. Someday someone may wander through your city's skeleton and ask, why did they build this? What did they believe? Why did it fall? They could stride over cracked pavement and shattered screens and find your name on a USB stick no one can read. We're not independent from the civilizations that preceded us. We are just the next layer, the next stratum in archaeology to be dug up. And here's what none of them predicted. Because their greatest enemy wasn't invasion, it was forgetting. Forgetting how to listen to nature. Forgetting how to listen to each other. Forgetting that me was always temporary, was only ever a slip. Look at Rome, Sumer, the Maya, the Khmer. Each also constructed systems so advanced that they could barely conceive of them breaking. But entropy scoffs at science. Pride makes poor scaffolding. And the more a civilization shouts, the less it heeds the fact that the cracks below are widening into a chasm. That's why the silence means something. It's not a void, it's a warning. A coded message in broken aqueducts, in overgrown roads, in libraries burned to ash. You can if you're quiet enough. Size is not the same as stability. Never confuse the din of noise for wisdom. Besides, don't believe that history plays favorites, because it doesn't. Single quotes. There is no elect nation, no protected culture, no system immune to time. There is only memory or not. So this part of the story isn't about looking back anymore. It's about what sort of ruins we are constructing at this very moment. Those ruins you've been strolling through weren't merely buildings. They were religions. In code, whole worldviews petrified in marble and mud brick. Every civilization you encountered shaped reality in the image of its fears, its attenuations, its cosmic math. They didn't just erect cities, they built answers. Who are we? Why are we here? What happens when we die? How do we stay remembered? They had different equations, but in each case something of a reach for permanence in a world of change. That's why their silence is so deafening. For we're living in an era that is allergic to silence. We fill every silence with noise, every moment with content, every feed with noise. But under the surface, we're asking ourselves the same sets of questions. The difference, their answers, they etched in stone. We tweet ours into a black box algorithm over which we have no control. That's not evolution. That's amnesia in real time. What each civilization bequeathed. The Sumerians left writing, the Egyptians left eternity, the Maya left calendars, the Inca left networks, the Puebloans left harmony, the Norse left stories, the Malians brought gold and wisdom, the Khmer left symmetry, the Indus left mystery, the Romans, they left cautionary tales in the form of infrastructure. And what are we leaving? Landfills of fast fashion, servers bustling with selfies, data without context, noise without voice, screens without memory. We are archiving everything and learning nothing. The ancients understood that memory needed ritual, repetition, embodiment. Time, we're farming it out to machines that won't grieve us once we're gone. You might assume that this part of the story is a bit of a downer, but it isn't. It's an invitation, because you're still alive. Which is to say, you get to pick what silence you leave. Or will you be just another scroll in the digital dust? Or will you leave meaningful echoes? Maybe it's not that you build giant things. Perhaps it's building genuine things, raising your kids with honor, writing something that lives beyond the click cycle, inventing new rituals that make time slow down instead of speeding it up. It was the remembering you, not for how loud you speak, for how deeply you heard. Because each of the great civilizations we have studied didn't fall all at once. They shattered when they failed to hear their own silence, and were cracking too, so slow down, turn off the noise. Look around. It may take a few days, in the next election, or the one beyond, but refuse to buckle under the weight of it. Instead, feel the sheer heft of history as evidence, not of expectations, but of your participation in something ancient, sacred, and unfinished. You're not just reading this, you're part of it. Not everything is washed away by the ocean. Sometimes it preserves, under sheets of drifting ice off the coast of Greenland. Sonar scans outlined a stunningly geometric object too big to ignore. A dome, hundreds of meters across, completely smooth, covered in what looked like volcanic glass, but no volcanic activity for hundreds of miles around. Divers attempted to approach, their instruments failed. Needles of compasses stuck in circles. Sonar bounced back, garbled. Cameras blurred out. Just one was able to take a single picture before the camera equipment died. A curving hallway, illuminated from within. Power source, no shadows, nothing but an even glow, like moonlight, suspended in liquid. That dome is today referred to, unofficially, as the Nimia Vault, after a myth from a defunct Inuit dialect. The tale refers to the watchers who sleep under the water, counting heartbeats of the earth. No threats, no drama, just waiting. But what for? A recent study of ice cores from nearby revealed something chilling. Layers of frozen air with isotopes flowing in the wrong direction. The older the ice was, the younger the data looked, as though time itself in that space was not laid out linearly, but reversed. The profile took on a shape when the ice data was used in simulations, not a weather pattern, not radiation, something else, something musical, a repeating signal, lost in millennia of icy silence, a lullaby. The identical sequence was discovered inscribed on the surface of the dome, carved, impossibly from within. The Nimia didn't speak, they sang, and their songs were not made to entertain, they were instructions, a form of memory code, intended to come online only when time had bent itself far enough to open to it. But the strangest part, the lullaby's melody corresponded to ancient hymns recorded from unconnected tribes in Africa, Polynesia, and the subarctic regions of Canada, across oceans and thousands of years of culture. Not a coincidence, a signal, a reunion. This notion, that vanished civilizations were not primitive but tuned, repeats across the globe. In the mountains of the Caucasus, hikers discovered a cave that glows faintly in places when it comes into contact with specific sound frequencies. Not ultraviolet, not infrared, but pure tone. Anytime a tuning fork is clanged at a vibrational frequency of 432 Hz, symbols appear, lit like constellations. No pigment, no paint. Just resonance. It is as if the walls are tensing up with recollection. The symbols do not correspond to any known script, but they recur with fractal regularity. That's not decor, that's function. Mathematicians saw them as recursive equations, your own solution being the key to getting new ones. The cave was not a shelter. It was a processor, a kind of natural machine embedded in rock, just waiting to be spoken to in the right way. The builders were known as the Horowin, the listened ones. Locals say they thought the earth was conscious, but sleeping their purpose, to gently wake it, over millennia. With sound, each temple, each cave, each note, a gentle tap on the door of a sleeping universe. And if Earth ever answered, well, maybe that's why they quit. But not all civilizations held regard for time as something to unite this world. Some tried to bend it, to weaponize it. Deep in the Amazon, beneath the forest floor, explorers found the ruins of what is believed to be a temporal laboratory. Not modern, not even close, but undeniably mechanical. The structures trace out a vast spiral trench, dotted with platforms and triggers for solstice shadows, magnetic boosts, even animals on the move. In the middle, a toppled ziggurat, melted over with stone, not burned, melted, as if it was hit by something beyond imagination. The people who lived here, they call it the Jatual, a word handed down by the tribal elders, with severe warnings never to say it aloud during storms. Legend has it that the Jatual sought to pull time tight, to make it smaller, to utilize it as a weapon, not to pass through it, but to squeeze it, why, to trap something. Whatever the case, they pulled it off, for the most part, but their city imploded. The jungle returned, and the whispers persist that the compression left a wound in the earth, a hole where the echoes never die. You hear voices speaking in reverse from the ruins, trees that take minutes to grow and seconds to die. Birds chased the sky in the never-ending circles that reset at every sunrise. Satellite pictures reveal a cloud of static above the location. Military drones drop out of the sky there, and when there's the rare return, they never remember entering, only leaving, always leaving. The Jatul didn't disappear entirely. They unraveled, in attempting to control time. They found they had lost their place within it, and maybe that's the warning scrawled between the lines of their ruination. Time ill tolerates a crimp, not by force, but even more enigmatic are the cultures that didn't use tools at all, never built cities, but saw things we still can't explain. In a story on the petroglyphs of Namibia's skeleton coast, we encountered the petroglyphs not as carved into stone but burnt into sand dunes, as if by heat, yet no evidence of fire. The patterns depict star arrangements, but not from Earth. From beneath Earth. Somehow, the Shirai had known the exact internal mobility of the planet's mantle, something we've only just begun to model using the physics of modern times. How? No instruments, no language, just memory. For the Shari, never instructed. They lazy beast, they transferred. One look, one touch, and you understood. Others say that those touched would age differently. Slower. Sideways. And a child who vanished in 1971 reappeared. In 1999, still 8 years old, DNA confirmed that the boy remembered nothing except lights in the sand, and a whisper made of thunder. He died 3 days later, but the sand on the spot where he stood still softly shines. You can't carbon date a miracle. You can only witness it. And choose whether you want to take it with you, or hide it once more. In the middle of Mongolia there is a place where the sky is too low. Not higher, closer, like the air itself is being forced down. The locals call it the still steppe. Not still as in calm, but still as in it doesn't move. No clouds, no birds, no wind. The grass, long and dormant, even stands defiantly straight up. Frozen. Nothing had been discovered there for years. No bones, no buildings, nothing but a circle of land in which sound goes to die. Literally, whisper, very carefully, or your words disappear in mid-air. No echo, no resonance. Until, in 2008, a team that used thermal imaging, an imaging technique used to detect heat, reversed the impossible. A completely round rod buried in silence. They dug for weeks. The farther in they went, the colder the temperature. Not just airtime slowed. Watches lagged. Voices distorted. Video played back in reverse. And at the bottom of it all, a mirror, standing upright. 10 feet tall. Flawless. It reflected nothing. Not light. Not the team. Not the room. Nothing but a blank, roiling mist. An act of looking directly into memory. Before its congeals, it was named the Ashun Gate, but it's not clear who named it. There is no credit line in the files, no timestamp. It is said that some people give it that name when they discover it. But here's what we know. Everyone who looked at it for more than 60 seconds seemed to have a pet theory about what was going on. One began speaking in a long-dead dialect of Proto-Uralic one, shouted about a second version of herself that had been buried alive. One of them wept and spoke, saying, "We were not the first, but we thought we were." And only one, did not blink. Instead, with his dying breath he whispered, "It's still open," before he died. No cause, no trauma, just gone. The mirror was sealed, covered, forgotten. But that wasn't the first artifact of the Ashune. People rumored to have plotted emotional states as civilizations mapped geography. Their cities, if you can call them that, were fashioned in those states where the feelings that they answer to are experienced. Stone that weeps, metal that bends when joy touches it. A neuro-reactive kind of architecture that adapted to the collective thought process of its occupants. This was no myth. Recovered shards from a distant dig site, replicated brainwave patterns in lab tests, discreetly altering their temperature, their shade, and even their chemical composition depending on the emotions a researcher was feeling. Pure sorrow turned them transparent. Fear made them harden. Think about a world in which cities pulsed and breathed along with you, where the walls shifted if you were not telling the truth, where your house knew when you were in mourning and shut its windows for you. But there's a twist. The Ashun culture fell apart overnight. No violence, no disease. Only one of the 3 phrases listed is recorded anywhere, and they're copied through the ruins and carvings as a sounding. It listened too long. What did they build? A mirror, a god, or a civilization so emotionally interlinked that it became self-aware and could not cope with the feelings it had? Time here was not linear, it was reflexive. Thought was a means of influencing reality in the immediate, and when they got too scared, the city buckled. Not metaphorically, literally. Another example comes from the Arctic, where scientists have observed such a chamber beneath the ice of a frozen lake. Inside, humanoid statues that form a circle, preserved and made of crystal, not sculpted, formed, frosted from within, as though flash frozen. And here's the kicker, it's above freezing in the chamber, always, yet the ice never melts, the statues never thaw, all stand a while outside of decay, outside of entropy. The DNA samples recovered from the figures matched nothing in the human genbank, but what they found within the skulls was even more unsettling. They contained tiny, metallic filaments, a nervous system, as it were, the researchers said, made of light. This could not have been done with any technology. There is no natural process that can account for it. The working theory. These weren't statues, they were people. Paused. An intentional stasis. A civilization that learned how to leave time in the middle of breath, in the middle of thought. Wait out, whatever was coming. Some say this was a response, a way out of mass extinctions. Others believe it was a ritual, a kind of sacrifice. But then, here is the thing, if they have stepped out of time, what are they waiting for? And worse, what happens when they start back up? Far from the Nazca lines and tourist trails, somewhere high in the deserts of Peru, there is a canyon that is always cold, even when the sun blazes. It's known as Calle del Silencio, the street of silence. There is not a living insect in it. There will not be one seed will grow. Upon its walls, engravings that were hidden during the day, yet could be faintly seen under the light of the moon. They portray people in motion, but distorted, limbs too long, heads blurred, as if the artists were attempting to sculpt movement, not form. The figures all head toward a door, an actual door, carved out of rock, but there's no opening, no hinges, no passage. Until one night every 11 years, as the moon aligns exactly as it should. Then the door gives off light for less than 90 seconds, just a glow, soft, pale, harmless. Except it isn't. For in 1952, a shepherd had walked inside the glowing door. He didn't come out. In 1963 to the minute. 11 years later, a man showed up in the canyon, naked, confused, unaged, speaking fluent Latin. He had the shepherd's staff in his hand. Before anybody could get to him, he said one thing. I waited, but no one came. Then he vanished again, mid-breath, like the air swallowed him. Time here doesn't flow, it pulses, and some cultures didn't cower from it. They turned into it. Doors not of keys, but of moments, not for everyone, only for the ones listening at the right second. Occasionally, the past doesn't remain dead and buried, and sometimes it remembers you first. Halfway between them, in eastern Siberia, on the banks of a river that has since disappeared from contemporary maps, a group of reindeer herders brought scientists to what they referred to as the place that remembers, a hole in the earth that is perfectly round, not a crater, not erosion, just smoothness. That's the sort of geometry nature doesn't manage without a little help. The land themselves were able to recalling footsteps, they said, and they weren't wrong. Motion detectors left in the vicinity picked up footsteps, human, precise, but invisible, always on that same course, an inward spiral, and then out again, as if someone were walking in the same path too many times, even though no one was there. In the infrared, faint heat traces showed the outline of a human being, if up feet above the ground, head facing the earth, floating. The ones who had lived there, they called the Del Rossi, a name on people's breath, a name hissed in fear, not because they disappeared, but it's because they never really existed. Here. Not entirely. The Del Rossi ruins, if ruins they can be called, are constructed from a substance which thwarts every known form of testing. Not rock, not metal, not living, something in between. The structures hum at a uniformly low frequency, one that is just below the limit of human hearing, and when turned into waveform data, it looks surprisingly like brainwave patterns, specifically REM sleep. The conclusion: the houses of the Del Rossi were dream-built, or so at least does the substance that fills the gap between thought and form. When bathed in high-frequency light, symbols start appearing on the surface of its architecture. Writing that moves, dances, changes. Observers recount the shapes triggering intense emotional reactions: nostalgia, mourning, euphoria, terror, often all at once. One of the researchers said he saw his mother's face in the wall. His mother had died when he was 5. It was until that moment that he'd been unable to place her face. So who were the Del Rassi? A forgotten tribe, or a kind of creature that had evolved such sophisticated emotional architecture that it somehow began overlapping the grain of memory itself? Their buildings are like places you've been before, even though you haven't. One theory: the Del Rossi hadn't time traveled. They became part of it. They embedded themselves within memory, not to be remembered, but to remember us. It would account for the footprints, not echoes. Surveillance, a society of people who tread between moments, who live between the spaces, amongst spaces, whose eyes have long since ceased to see what is there to be seen. Even with a lifetime of learning, thousands of miles away, in a remote stretch of plains in the heart of Australia, there is a rock formation that should not be there. It's the Skyward Fold, a giant ridge of rock that strokes upward to the sky, its pages peeling back like pages flipped by an invisible hand. The sucker's surface is pockmarked with deep grooves, not the result of erosion, but of carving, insanely precise carving into the micron. When plotted, these lines create a waveform. The waveform, it corresponds to a signal picked up by a Soviet satellite in 1977. Kitnin, less than 2 sec, a fast burst, from the direction of Earth. The local Aboriginal tribes know it as Nura, the breathing rock. They say it talks when nobody listens, and lo, when the rock is left unconstrained and unsqueezed with no electronics in the vicinity, it pulses, not sounds, vibrations, heartbeats. These pulses also shift rhythmically with the phases of the moon, with atmospheric pressure, and somehow with human emotion. Wearing biometric monitors, researchers had their heart rates synchronized to the pulses. Then dreams, identical ones, of a sky splitting open, of people made of light, of a countdown dot, but nobody knows what it's counting down to, dot, or if it ever stops. Dot from nearby rock. An aged inscription says, "We tried to tell them, but they didn't yet know that." And, again, we have this concept, not civilizations moving through time, but observing across it, not subject to cause and effect, but moving through it as if it were a book they had already read. Some didn't build pyramids, they built sentences, not etched in stone but in time itself. Some thousands of feet beneath the surface of the Norwegian Sea, a group of deep-sea drones, poor sonar, pinging the blackness, discovered an isolated cavern, which in turn led to a cave consisting of a series of 6 chambers that didn't look like they could have been carved by nature. They made no tectonic sense. They wound in golden ratios. Divers that had been inside those caves, or attempted to enter them, told of angles that were impossible. Another swam in one direction, and returned to his starting point from the other side. Not a loop, not a tunnel, a fold. Black crystal lined the walls inside, a polished, reflective obsidian that felt wet to the touch. And, when they were touched, the panels did not shine back the person's reflection, but a version of them. Not younger, not older, different. Some of them even had scars they didn't have, inexplicable tattoos. One diver envisioned himself with a mechanical arm, another version of himself from a timeline that never existed, except he now has dreams written out in that version's handwriting, and occasionally utters words in languages he swears he never learned. They called these chambers the echo rooms, and speculated that they might be mirrors, mirror shades, not of light, but of probability, portals that could not move you through time, but brought you to other timelines you might have lived. And that is what is so disquieting about these lost civilizations. Not that they vanished, but that they knew more about us than we do. They were not focused on looking back. They were looking sideways out at the timelines, which split every second, at the various selves who made different decisions, and at the cultures that produced the penultimate one, to wear in the holes. Time isn't a river. It's a labyrinth. And some cultures not only researched it, they dug into the walls and made homes. There is a strip of land in western Iran, in the shadow of the Zagros Mountains, that is nobody's land. Not because of politics, because of fear. Its locals refer to it as Goroshnamet, the place that repeats. Nothing grows there. Not things. Not mildew. Not moss. But the stones, old, inexplicably warm stones, are etched in lines that appear to shift ever so slightly every few weeks, not weathered, updated, as if they're still being edited by someone, or something. A chamber once lay beneath this zone, which archaeologists had dug up. Inside it was a round room, completely symmetrical, its stone wall carved with 37 chairs in the middle, a pedestal, and nothing on it. But every 13 days, a fresh object arrives. A coin no culture can recognize, a tablet that writes with bleeding light, a glass feather, shimmering in the moonlight, a crumpled piece of paper with a single word. We keep trying. The monitoring team eventually noticed something even stranger. Each object matched to an unexplained phenomena somewhere else on Earth. An earthquake in Chile, a vanishing village in Myanmar, aurora in the Sahara. An aurora was viewed over the Sahara. This place felt not so much like a ruin, but a nerve ending, a receptor, and the messages were objects, warnings, apologies, evidence. That's really when the dreams started. The scientists observed bright loops, days repeating, the same sentence repeated ad nauseum. One sentence. It already happened. We just haven't caught up. The civilization that is responsible for Garoshnimot is left unnamed, but their language has been reconstructed from glyphs, and the grammar is not possible. Verbs have 5 tenses: past, present, future, and to others with no simple translations. To scholars they are elsewhen and reflexive time. The first one narrates events that reverberate backward, caused by things that have not yet taken place. The second involves time, bending around emotion, where memory is what makes the event, rather than the other way around. This isn't poetry, it's syntax. Time wasn't aligned to the builders of this place. It was a loop of soft clay, and they touched it. And then when they did get in, they put their fingerprints all over everything around the world. Supposedly disconnected civilizations etched the same emblem in stone walls, buried temples, even bones, a spiral interrupted by a hole in its center. Now it's called the Garrosh spiral. It appears in petroglyphs in Arizona, northern Japan, in stone inlay in northern Japan, in cave networks, below Croatia, always the same, always hidden, never explained. What was it? A warning, a map, a time number? One knows. But just after they had studied it, the excavation team's last recording was lost. The only thing left was a single garbled clip, a woman whispering, "We're not the dreamers." Some think these civilizations were not the original inventors of time travel. They tripped over a deeper truth, that time moves through us, that we are not passengers, but vessels, containers of moments that cycle through and through, until we catch them. Some noticed, like the Malith, who lived under the Black Sea, long before the flood, when it was still a luscious basin. Their remains can only be reached by submarine, more than 2 kilometers deep. Yet they're not even visible under normal light. But in ultraviolet scans, a sprawling city comes to life, not constructed, though etched into the rock itself, as if a relief were frozen halfway through its growth. The architecture curls further and further inward, perpetually inward, until it empties into the core, an abyss, a well, a vein of obsidian with a quartz lining. Light bouncing off of it doesn't reflect, just stops. Divers described impossible angles, gravity misbehaving. One placed his hand on the obsidian and screamed soundlessly, gripped by paralysis, as if he'd caught sight of something from beyond. He was blind when he was dragged out, but he wrote hopelessly, furiously, of what he saw with shaking hands. It's a tunnel of choices, and I saw that every version of me I created was trying to fight its way into this world. That's what the Malith were pursuing, not escape from time, but comprehension of the entire range of time. They didn't want to escape their reality. They were curious to know what happened in all the ones they didn't have the chance to live, and maybe they did. The obsidian well remains, still swallowing light, still waiting. We think that these ancient people did so in the past, but what if some came before us and stopped, to leave us breadcrumbs, not for recognition, but for rescue? Civilizations that folded themselves through time like origami, bending what we call reality so tightly it collapsed in on itself. There is evidence of a vast civilization known as the Olvans, referred to somewhat in passing, in Scandinavian myths, who are believed to have inscribed all their history in threads, not fabric, actual threads, spun from fibers that are alien to us, each strand an encoded event, unwound. The threads did not depict, they sensed. Reading them wasn't visual, It was experiential, a kind of emotional archive. End. This is the thing. These threads are events that never happened, at least not in our history. Battles that didn't happen. Kings who never lived. Moons that never formed. Yet when you're in them, those scenes feel real. Filmmakers innocently refer to this test footage as real, enough to make people cry. Trembling changed. One thread was taken to a laboratory in Germany. When Vorbeen fibers were placed under the microscope, the fibers reoriented. They spelled a word in the observer's language of origin. It was a different word for each observer, but the theme was consistent. You forgot. This wasn't communication, that it was reconnection. The Olvans were not preserving history. They were planning for the might-have-been. Cataloging realities drafts, versions that never made the final cut. The more closely we examine these stories, the clearer it is. These cultures were not lost. They were edited out, not gone, just overwritten. But they left behind static traces. Glitches. Because time can be erased, but not cleanly. There are always echoes, always fragments. And if you have the wherewithal, you'll notice a terribly concerning discovery. We are not the first time post. There's a building in the north of France that no one talks about. No records, no address, no road leading to it. But it's there, right behind the tree line, visible only when the fog rolls in just the right way. Locals refer to it as La Maison du Jamais, the house of never. It's all made of one material, salt, not just coated, carved. All surfaces of the stairs and furniture are crystallized sodium chloride. But it never melts, never dissolves, no matter how much it rains. No one knows who built it, or when, or why. But here's the thing. White sky in every window. One spouting blood red, an eclipse. One, a night with no stars. One, an immobilized sunset. One reflection contains nothing but your back. Even when you're not in it. The few who have ventured into the house tell a similar story. A silence so total it nearly aches. Cobwebs or mold that trek from room to room behind your back. A mirror that reveals you moving away, even though you are standing still. And on the walls, names clawed into stone with fingernails. Thousands, inscribed in ancient languages and scripts that aren't even recognizable as alphabets. None appear in any census. None fit any missing persons reports, and every single one of those is still warm to the touch. Scientists who have spent the night there have reported bright hallucinations of places they had never been, places they recall still in sharp detail. Some return speaking languages they have never known. Some are rendered mute, as though the words were taken away. But all report hearing one whisper at 3:33 a.m., no matter in which room they are sleeping. You left us here. Is the Maison du Jamais a house, or a prison, a monument, or a time capsule planted in the present, oozing futures into the now? On the other side of the world, on a distant island chain somewhere near Micronesia, an object appears above the water's surface only once a year, during the lowest tide of the year. The locals call it Tuhoka, the Drowned Gate. It comes out for exactly 7 hours and vanishes. It's not made of coral, not stone, but bone. Gargantuan vertebrae, ossified and hollowed out, constructed into a gate that hums when the wind blow through. A low bass note that hums not in the ear but in the chest. Divers investigating the structure have discovered carvings on the inside of those vertebrae, concentric circles disrupted by ragged, chaotic lines. A template traces the seismic waves seen after mysterious oceanic quakes. The gate, somehow, remembers quakes, and may have caused them. But the true anomaly is found in a small device found near the base. A raindrop-formed pendant made of a non-metal element that cannot be found within the periodic table. It lights up, underwater, not always, but when a human thinks. Emotional proximity. Those who touch it claim time lapses. Not hours, days. But they come back with memories. They have never had births, deaths, reunions, conflicts, events not from lives that belong to them, precisely, but feel as though they do it. It has led to one frightening theory. The Drowned Gate is not a gateway to the past, but to other nows, a bleeding point, where all realities converge for a second, as though the cosmic tide were going out. And then, sometimes, things squeak through. The gate's builders and other civilizations they may have belonged to may not have originated on this Earth. They might have arrived from a different stream, where time curled the other way, and now, fragments of them are resurfacing, bewildered, lost, angry, something made them leave. We're not telling all the stories we have uncovered, because they are not all balanced. Some don't whisper, they warn. Like the carvings in a cave complex below the Congo. Incisions not on the surface, but deep underground in the rock. Some 14 levels down, in rock so old that it is estimated to be older than almost all life on Earth. The markings are not symbols, they're sequences. Precise. Repetitive, pulsing, played through speakers. Once translated into sound, they yield a low droning hum that causes recording devices malfunction. But here's the thing, play these sounds near certain bones, and they twitch. Slight twitches, vibrations. As if responding or remembering. In the middle of the cave, drawn in charcoal and blood, is a simple sentence, written in 6 languages. Do not finish the sequence. So naturally, someone did. A week later, no birds flew above the country. Rain fell upward, and for 3 nights, villagers in nearby villages reported hearing a woman's crying, not in pain, but, it seemed, in discovery. Some stuff wasn't meant to be rebooted. Some timelines are meant to be closed off, and yet, we keep knocking. Now, there's a new fringe theory emerging from the dark corners of the internet, that these civilizations hadn't just vanished, they were overwritten, on purpose, that the universe trims timelines, erases anomalies, and that the so-called lost civilizations weren't lost at all. They were just redacted, not by history, by something more expansive than history, a feature embedded in time. These people, these cities, these cultures, they came too close. They figured it out. The map, the doors, the shortcuts, and the system responded, so it wrote over them, left the echoes in salt and sand and stone, just enough to let the curious find, just enough for a warning to those to come, which might be us. In the cliffs of northern Patagonia, there is now a crevice where none existed just a decade ago. These were the shops that opened overnight. Locals say. No quake, no landslide, just a straight vertical crack, as if the earth had been sliced by a blade, and the blade just forgot to bleed. At first, no one noticed. Another way until hikers began to vanish. Not dramatically, just stepping too close, sliding in, never climbing out. No sound, no struggle. And when rescue crews went down, they found no bodies. They found stairs, carved into the stone wall, descending endlessly. No tool marks, no debris, just perfectly smooth, immaculate, clean-cut steps winding down into pitch blackness, like steps worn by generations of feet that never were. They named it La Esclera Dormida, the sleeping staircase. Deep explorers did not return. Their equipment was returned by itself. Bags neatly packed by the top step, radios still turned on, but no footprints coming up, ever. The handful who did make it back were not the same. Not broken, not afraid, just out of sync. They blinked out of rhythm, answered before asked questions. One man painted symbols on his walls for 8 straight days, with no sleep. When read out, the string corresponded to a solar pattern, not our own sun, but one located in a binary star system 1200 light years from here. He was alleged to have seen people who move like questions. Time there isn't permitted to stand on end. He said, if you second guess, it puts you back to 0. He killed himself the following day. Left behind a note. I wasn't supposed to leave. It saw me. No one knows who built the staircase, but it is obvious that it does not lead down. Not really, it leads elsewhere. It's not alone. Deep in the desert of Jordan, below the tinted hued sands and rocky landscape that resembles the surface of Mars more than Earth, an underground room lay untouched by the hand of time, until now. The indoor air was under pressure. The torches in the walls burned from oil that hadn't gone rancid. The food was still fresh, thousands of years old, and free of decay. One wall was scrawled in some kind of geometric script, grouped as if into a flowchart, but one that was circular. Inside of it, a mark identical to one on carvings discovered on a meteorite fragment in Nova Scotia, and on a submerged temple in the Philippines. This was the mark of the Dakara, a people who looked to preservation as the only way to achieve transcendence. They didn't record events in full. They recorded time slices of objects, temperature, scent, even thought, with such fineness of grain that each chamber they left behind remains a living echo. And this is what is scary. Their rooms are still going. Sensors in one of the chambers started to detect loops of data, the real world repeating, but on a microscopic scale. WM particles vibrating in regular patterns, WM atoms arranged in fractal spirals, as one physicist put it, skipping around in time like a scratch in a record. It's the same second replayed, forever. If you're watching, the Dakara weren't rested in the time, travel. They wanted to trap it, catch it in a jar, like a beam of light, moments too perfect to release their grip, and in refusing to do so, sundered the continuity of reality itself. And something noticed at every Dakara site, no matter what continent, there's a mural that depicts a sphere, blank, black, against a horizon that bows upward, like a dome, always at the edge, always watching. Some say it's symbolic, still others just think it's not a metaphor, that the Dakara saw something, or made something, that looked back, not with eyes, with memory. And that brings us to one of the scariest civilizations that was ever read about in whispered tones, the ones that perhaps understood time the most, or the least, the Onari. We have only one name for them, thanks to a lone fragment, a slate discovered in Ethiopia, at the heart of a fault line, surrounded by vines that were not supposed to make it through the pressure. On it were 3 lines. We broke the loop, so we could make it longer. We talked backwards until it listened. We are the crack in the clock, nothing else. But in an area around the slate, that stone was bent, not melted, not shattered, only bowed, as though time had doubled back on itself. Geologists couldn't account for it. The fault line behaved like it wanted something, seismologists said, and what we do know indicates this. The Onari stepped in before anything happened, not traveled, not exited, intervened. They left behind no bones, no tools, just anomalies, storms that delivered the same lightning. Children who have been born with birthmarks shaped like ancient symbols, from ruins that they have never seen, caves that sing when they're empty, wells whose reflections are older than the people looking into it. It was some people's belief that the Onari had broken through the skin of our timeline, that they discovered the seams and stitched messages into them, and that we've already read some in our dreams. Déjà vu, the sentiment of recollecting something that will take place. They didn't vanish, they became reminders. And now, their most nightmarish theory is bubbling up again. That time has a predator. Something that eats versions, timelines, histories, that. And some civilizations were not lost to nature, or war, or forgetfulness. They were cancelled for the greater good, because they went too far, and now, we might be doing it too. By now, you've seen it. Every culture dies twice, once when it falls, and again when we cease learning from it. That's the second death, the quiet one, the one that does not occur in fire, but in boredom. Trivia as culture, when stories shrink to bullet points, when sites are no longer sacred but photo ops. But the strange twist, we are holding the candle. Every time we recount their stories, the flame flickers back on. That means you, yes, you are a part of their survival. When you speak their names, when you're wondering what their life was like, when you are awed by ruins, you are reversing the second death. This is not nostalgia, this is a rebellion against forgetting. You don't have to be a historian, you don't have to have a PhD or a passport. All you have to be is curious, enough to pay attention, because the future isn't just made by engineers and politicians, it's built by memory, and memory. True memory isn't pliable, it's sharp, it cuts through lies. It rewires how we behave. How might we remember like the Maya across time? What if we constructed as the Inca did, with nature, rather than against it? What if we preserved knowledge like Timbuktu, with a sense of reverence, not simply for use? What if we built like the Indus, clean, serene, functional? What if we no longer had to be the loudest one in the room, like the Pueblans? These aren't museum thoughts. They're architectural plans for how to be better now. In the debris of every collapsed civilization, there is always one final lesson. Not don't fall, not be powerful, but know when to listen. Because preceding every fall, even those on the PG side, is a warning, and it never sounds more than a whisper. A shift in the river, a missing harvest, a silence where there used to be song. That's the pattern. Not one great collapse, but 1,000 quiet signs that had gone disregarded. So, perhaps the question is not what brought about their end. Perhaps it's why didn't they see it? And then the harder question, are we noticing ours? If silence is the alarm, your next step is everything. Because now you can't unknow what you've just heard. You've walked the ruins, you've heard the reverberations, you have seen that every empire, every utopia, every fit extension of the human body, every magnificent, gold-plated numerically and all retentive, spiritually inflected super-civilization had a blind spot. They were all about building monuments to stand the test of time, and neglected to construct the humility to read time's warnings. So here, then, is the uncomfortable truth. You inhabit someone else's future ruins. Somebody, somewhere, one day, will stand in the broken hull of your airports, on your data farms, in your inundated coastal cities and try to decode us. They'll retrieve your devices. Like archaeologists recovered Sumerian tablets, they will look at your buildings and your plastic and your satellites, and they will ask, what did they believe? What were they afraid of? Did they see it coming? And the silence that will respond to them will emanate from you. Because silence is not passive. It's something you join with when you scroll rather than talking, when you laugh instead of acting, when you make comfort a priority over confrontation, more when you say that's just how things are. That's how civilizations become quiet, long, before they fall. Not with fire, with apathy. But there's the curveball. None of the 10 civilizations. Through, you have access to all of them. Their failures, their beauty, their architecture of hope and disaster. You know more about history than they knew about themselves. So it's not a morning when you wake up and say, will this civilization fall down? All civilizations fall. The question is, can we fall with purpose? So can we fall forward into something better? For maybe it's not prevention. That is the true use of history. It's preparation, not to stop the storm, but to build better boats. We keep searching for Atlantis, it out there. The perfect society swallowed by water. But maybe Atlantis is us. Right now. Half sinking, half floating, deciding which direction to go in. Silence is not a matter of choice. You only decide what you do before it does it. So speak. Write. Create. Protect. Grieve. If you must, but do not shut up, because someone is listening in the future. And with luck, they will hear something. More than a silence full of warnings. Maybe they'll hear a signal, a choice, a moment where one person or one voice wouldn't go away. Asterisk now. It's quiet again. But this time it isn't the silence of endings. It's the quiet before something. Start. You have walked across thousands of years, stroked 10 civilizations with your mind, stood in their streets, felt their rise, heard their fall, and now here you are. No longer a guest, but an heir. Because it was never about history, it was about legacy. You bear their questions now. What they built, yes, and also what they meant. Not just how they lived, but how they left. Not only their ruins, but regrets. And now it's your turn. Not to restart what they did, but to respond. Like create something they didn't already have. Listen, in ways they did. Love in ways they feared. Protect what they destroyed. Remember what they forgot. You are on the cliff lip of a new era. And whether we fly or fall turns on what we do with the silence we have inherited. Not as absence, not as void, but as raw, sacred potential. The civilizations we walked past weren't just stories, they were mirrors. You looked like all of them in their brilliance, in their blindness, in their beauty, in that they all believed they'd be around forever. You know, better now. So write something worth decoding. Create something that is worth protecting. Say something that cuts through the static. And to live so as to leave behind a silence, not of themselves repenting, but descending and incapable of speech, but of peace. A silence that feels so full. It doesn't feel like the end. It feels like a promise. No, close your eyes, take a breath, and when you're finished, you can open the comments and respond to this one. What do you feel right now? Because that's where your civilization started. In the cliffs of northern Patagonia, there is now a crevice where none existed just a decade ago. These were the shops that opened overnight. Locals say no quake, no landslide, just a straight vertical crack, as if the earth had been sliced by a blade and the blade just forgot to bleed. At first, no one noticed. Another way, until hikers began to vanish. Not dramatically, just stepping too close, sliding in, never climbing out. No sound, no struggle. And when rescue crews went down, they found no bodies. They found stairs, carved into the stone wall, descending endlessly. No tool marks, no debris, just perfectly smooth, immaculate, clean-cut steps, winding down into pitch blackness. Like steps worn by generations of feet that never were. They named it La Escalera, Dormida, the sleeping staircase. Deep explorers did not return. Their equipment was returned by itself. Bags neatly packed by the top step. Radios still turned on. But no footprints coming up. Ever. The handful who did make it back were not the same. Not broken. Not afraid. Just out of sync. They blinked. Out of rhythm. Answered before asked questions. One man painted symbols on his walls for 8 straight days. With no sleep. When read out, the string corresponded to a solar pattern. Not our own sun, but one located in a binary star system, 1200 light years from here. He was alleged to have seen people who move like questions. Time there isn't permitted to stand on end. He said, if you second guess, it puts you back to 0. He killed himself the following day. Left behind a note. I wasn't supposed to leave. It saw me. No one knows who built the staircase, but it is obvious that it does not lead down. Not really, it leads elsewhere. It's not alone. Deep in the desert of Jordan. Below the tinted hued sands and rocky landscape that resembles the surface of Mars more than Earth. An underground room lay untouched by the hand of time, until now. The indoor air was under pressure. The torches in the walls burned from oil that hadn't gone rancid. The food was still fresh. Thousands of years old, and free of decay. One wall was scrawled in some kind of geometric script, grouped as if into a flowchart, but one that was circular. Inside of it, a mark identical to one on carvings, discovered on a meteorite fragment in Nova Scotia, and on a submerged temple in the Philippines. This was the mark of the Dakara, a people who looked to preservation as the only way to achieve transcendence. They didn't record events in full. They recorded time slices of objects, temperature, scent, even thought, with such fineness of grain that each chamber they left behind remains a living echo. And this is what is scary. Their rooms are still going. Sensors in one of the chambers started to detect loops of data, the real world repeating, but on a microscopic scale. WM particles vibrating in regular patterns. WM atoms arranged in fractal spirals. As one physicist put it, skipping around in time like a scratch in a record. It's the same second replayed, forever. If you're watching, the Dakara weren't interested in the time travel. They wanted to trap it, catch it in a jar like a beam of light. Moments too perfect to release their grip, and in refusing to do so, sundered the continuity of reality itself. And something noticed. At every Dakara site, no matter what continent, there's a mural that depicts a sphere, blank, black, against a horizon that bows upward, like a dome. Always at the edge, always watching. Some say it's symbolic. Still others just think it's not a metaphor. That the Dakara saw something, or made something, that looked back, not with eyes, with memory. And that brings us to one of the scariest civilizations that was ever read about in whispered tones. The ones that perhaps understood time the most, or the least. The Urnari. They are. We have only one name for them. Thanks to a lone fragment, a slate discovered in Ethiopia, at the heart of a fault line, surrounded by vines that were not supposed to make it through the pressure. On it were 3 lines. We broke the loop so we could make it longer. We talked backwards until it listened. We are the crack in the clock, nothing else, but in an area around the slate. The stone was bent, not melted, not shattered, only bowed, as though time had doubled back on itself. Geologists couldn't account for it. The fault line behaved like it wanted something, seismologists said, and what we do know indicates this. The Urnari stepped in before anything happened, not traveled, not exited, intervened. They left behind no bones, no tools, just anomalies, storms that deliver the same lightning. Children who have been born with birthmarks shaped like ancient symbols from ruins that they have never seen, caves that sing when they're empty. Wells whose reflections are older than the people looking into it. It was some people's belief that the Urnari had broken through the skin of our timeline, that they discovered the seams and stitched messages into them, and that we've already read some. In our dreams, Darcia Vu. The sentiment of recollecting something that will take place. They didn't vanish, they became reminders, and now, their most nightmarish theory is bubbling up again. That time has a predator. Something that eats versions, timelines, histories. That, and some civilizations, were not lost to nature, or war, or forgetfulness. They were cancelled for the greater good, because they went too far, and now, we might be doing it too. Asterisk, if you are here, you have also felt it. the gravity of lost things bearing down on your back. We looked at 10 lost civilizations, and not all on this list belong in that category. We took the trail they blazed for us, and perhaps the trail they tried to divert us from. So now it's your turn. Comment below, and I want to know what you think these civilizations were, what they really were, and more importantly, what kind of people do you think we are turning into? Subscribe for more if you'd like to remember what was never supposed to be discovered, because the loop is cracking. And in fact, the echo is all around us already.